I'll go over like some of the troubleshooting steps that we like commonly that we see in, even during our performance testing or functional testing, and we'll go over like each of those items. So probably like under three section: metric configuration, anomaly detection, and anomaly alarm configuration. So purely from metric configuration side, so the common ones that we generally see is like while trying to create a group, we might actually not see the metrics that we actually are like intended to see. So that is one of the common ones. And the next one is the product itself might not be visible, right? In the metric configuration, the primary like first filter is to choose the product before going into like filtering the metrics. So the product itself might not be visible. And for these both of them, in general, the recommendation is like we can as well use the tenant token, which is available for like the specific tenant. We can go to metadata and query and see if those metrics are available. Just make sure like if there are any issues on the connector side to see whether the metrics are flowing, right? So this is one. I'll show like basically like how we can query and test. And the other major set that we also see is APM has like a huge volume of data, but not all of them actually propagate to OI. So there is a configuration or a metric grouping within like APM through management module. We configure a metric grouping called APM OI, which actually decides which of the metrics should flow into OI. And those are the only ones that get enriched with attributes. And purely from OI side, when we actually query the data, we only query for those like metrics which are actually enriched. So that's why there will be a case where we might be seeing more metrics on the APM side, but we may not be seeing that in our metric config. So in that cases, if we are interested, we have to go back and like configure the APM OI metric grouping itself to make sure like those metrics which we are like looking for are also added into that group so that they also get enriched. So I'll just switch over to show like the primary queries and the difference with respect to this one. So this is the like a query. These are like available in our like documentation, but I'll also add this into a troubleshooting wiki and then upload this postman collection as well. So here, simple example is if I know for sure, like for example, I'm looking for a specific agent, and then if I want to see the number of metrics that are flowing through, we actually query metadata itself using the tenant token, and then say like, okay, can you please go ahead and like return me the list of values that are available, right? And this will confirm saying like, okay, if we really have the data that we are looking for example, if you are specifically looking for a product, right? For example, like I'm like interested to see how many metrics are there, is it flowing, and am I having the right attributes? For example, like the primary one that we generally look for is the product metric names, and then like there are a few other fields like global ID. These are mostly managed by connectors, but sometimes in case of like third party data, if something is missing, it may not show up. So this is one way to just query and make sure like the metrics are live and they are also flowing into the system, right? This is one. And for example, here, if you're looking for a specific product and if you don't see it, we can actually go ahead and, for example, I'm just querying for all the custom metrics that are available in this tenant. You can go ahead and verify and then see if I really have the data for those. For example, like we see dynatrace and other components here configured. So we'll end up seeing the same thing. If I switch to UI, we'll also like when we say go ahead and like create a new metric group, here is where we will end up seeing like other than CAPM, UIM, and we also have like data coming in from dynatrace and SolarWinds. So if we don't see any of this, we can as well just go here and verify saying like, do I really have a live metric that I am not seeing in here? And the same holds good for like metrics as well. If we end up showing selecting some metric and then see here, for example, so I can actually go ahead and show the example of like the APM difference that we see. For example, this is one of the agents, and if I simply go ahead and say like go ahead and like use my source, and it exactly matches this. If you see here, it will show 42 metrics, but as such when we actually go here and then like I might have triggered that query already. So I'm saying exact match and then saying like give me this response. Now if you really see the overall metrics that are available for this particular agent, this is 2000 metrics, but we end up seeing only like 42 metrics here, which is primarily because of that enrichment that we talked about. So here if you see only these set of metrics, which are primarily like maybe bytes in use and GC heap, these are the ones that are configured. And if you see exactly like 42 metrics have this attribute section, and those are the only ones that are visible, and this is configurable using switch to So this is where if you want any other set of metrics to be there, this is one configuration that we would like to add as well. These are purely from the metric configuration side. Now moving on to anomaly detection, the common things that we actually see is like anomaly detection bands are not actually like visible for all the metrics in a group. In the sense, if I create a group and enable it, I'm not seeing the metrics itself. So for I'm not seeing the band for any of the metrics in the group, or I am not seeing for a specific metric, or the third case is primarily like for a specific time period, I'm not seeing a metric. So the bands, those are the three common use cases. When we don't really see for the group in general, like one of the way that we can actually verify is using the same tenant token. We can actually go ahead and verify if the the groups that we have created, whether they are actually available here. So here we simply say for my anomaly detection, give me all the queries that are registered with the query spec. So here, if for example, like if we have explicitly said like I am looking for all the metrics that are match coming from a specific host or anything, if you are using a regex to match, just see whether our regex is there. If this is missing, probably like that registration itself is missing. Maybe we have to go back and enable it. So that is like a standard like issue that we generally see. And the next one is like if at all by mistake, if your anomaly detection works on the numeric metrics, if the regex itself or if the group is created with more of like a string metrics or non-numeric metrics, they will automatically be discarded. So that is the other case. We have to just make sure that we have actually the right metrics configured for anomaly detection. So that is directly visible on the supportability metrics. We can directly see if the metrics are getting discarded. It will be automatically showing that the metrics are like not coming in. And the third use case is we also have something like some of the connectors in some cases, if they are not in time sync, they might be sending the metrics to NAS with future timestamp. For example, if our current time is like 8 a.m., it might be sending at 8 a.m. saying the value as 8:15 a.m. If those are the scenarios that come in, now what happens is like if we start processing the data as it comes, and then when we create anomalies and alarms, those are going to come into the system as like future in future, saying there is an alarm in future, right? So we don't want to end up in situations where like we create anomalies or alarms in future. So anytime, so we have a queue, like we will wait for like 30 seconds. If anything is being sent for the next 30 seconds into future, we can accommodate. But if at all the metrics are getting pushed beyond that, we will simply discard those. So probably if like all the metrics in a group are coming, probably the connector is like not in time sync or it is sending in future timestamp. So that is some area that we can check to see if there is any issue. So this is another supportability metric which can directly hint us saying like there are problems with the connector data itself. So this is purely when like all the metrics in a group are having issues. And if a specific metric is like on a particular group is missing, it might be like the first standard use case is like non-numeric one, and this one is like as future timestamp. It's the same, like depending upon where it comes from. And other third category is the metric is getting blacklisted. For example, if I go back to our screen, we have an option to go. So I'm just filtering the anomaly just to show like, okay, if we can pick one of the samples and then see if we have an option to go disable them. So here, if you notice that it is too noisy and it may not be a right candidate, but rest of the metrics might still be fine. But only this instance of that system PCT is having an issue. We also have an option to go ahead and disable this. So this we call that as metric backlisting. So only this metric will not be treated or considered for anomaly detection. So if we disable this, so the next option that we need to check is like, have we added this or disabled this, like so that like we don't see the bans for those metrics. So that's the third scenario that generally comes in when we don't see like the bands for a specific metric, right? And moving on, for like if you don't see for a specific time period, right? For example, I was continuously seeing the band, but there was a gap or there were like, uh, like holes in the bands itself. So there few scenarios, most of the time we can just check like if raw metrics are also missing, that's fine, which means like we don't even have the raw data. But if raw data is available but still like anomaly detection bands are missing, so there one of the things is like maybe at that time it might be having like future timestamp where we are discarding. Generally, like when the connector is continuous, we won't see these issues. But in general, like for example, like over like when it is like a connector gets restarted or something, if there are any issues, that might be the scenario where only at that particular specific time we might have like future timestamp coming in. And other than that, there are like also like Kafka monitor, like to monitor some of these components to see if there is any lag that get built upon any of these. So the first entry point will be the metric sorter, so which looks into the NAS metrics and then like process and forward it to anomaly detection. So we can just check using the Kafka monitor to see if there is any lag on the metric sorter. Then anomaly detection is the one that consumes those filtered metrics, so we can check if there is any lag. So these are the cases where we might see a gap. If the lag goes beyond like certain time, we might actually Kafka might have a default retention and drop those messages. Those are the scenarios where we might end up seeing like a gap in the specific time period, right? And then the next component is once we process, we actually create the extension data and push it into Kafka, which will be like consumed by NAS indexer and it will push the data. So these are the three components where if there is any lag that gets piled up, we might end up seeing like any gaps in the overall like timeline itself with respect to anomaly detection. And moving on, purely for anomaly alarm configuration. So once the raw anomalies get created, right, the anomaly alarms kick in and then try to actually do the processing. But if at all we don't see any anomaly alarms coming in, even though the configuration primarily like whatever the configuration that we have done is fine. So some of the like behaviors that we have noticed is like primarily coming in from the third party one, where we expect the product to be available so that we can categorize and then create anomalies accordingly and like group them based on it. But sometimes like it is not available, so those are the scenarios where our metadata itself might not have the expected like attributes that are available. For example, at least for anomaly, the very minimum that we look for is the product field here, right? If this itself is not available, we will not be in a position to go actually like look for other fields and then like populate the data. So that is one thing where we have to just verify that the metadata is looking fine. And the next scenario is basically like if the data is sporadic, like where it is not continuous, it might the model itself might not be mature enough. It has to at least look for like 500 data points before starting like producing anomalies. So the model is still learning. So probably that might be the reason why we may not be seeing the anomaly alarms. And the third one is basically purely on the configuration. For example, if we like set the anomaly like more defensively, like saying like 9 out of 10 occurrences, which means like in an hour we are expecting at least like 54 minutes it has to report as anomaly. In those scenarios, even though the raw anomalies are flowing into the system, we may not really have an anomaly alarm for the system, primarily because like it might be just reporting maybe 30 minutes out of 60 minutes or 5 minutes out of 60 minutes. But since we have configured it to say like only if it happens 54 minutes out of 60 minutes, then go ahead and create an alarm, then it might not be. So the last option is just to check like if there is the configuration for anomaly alarm itself is like properly done.